What up, everybody? Welcome back to the Fitness Stuff for Normal People podcast. I'm Tony.
And I'm Mariana.
And the fitness industry right now is just not what it could be. It's become something built on unrealistic expectations, aesthetics, and external validation, directing attention away from everything that really matters. The bottom line is we're not just trying to provide another fitness podcast, but completely change the fitness industry for the better by providing you with the knowledge and tools to give you the confidence in applying the best possible evidence-based training and nutrition into your own life. Where today we are talking about IIFYM, or if it fits your macros, which before we even say what it is, how have we not talked about this yet? IIFYM, or if it fits your macros, is a dietary strategy that revolves around setting a specific calorie, protein, carb, and fat goal, and then technically eating whatever foods you want throughout the day, as long as you're hitting those targets to lose fat, build muscle, or maintain. It's built on the most fundamental principles of the human metabolism and is scientifically the most reliable way to lose weight, build muscle, and do everything that we talked about. It's almost too good to be true, or it can be. Today, we're going to need context to say for sure, because we're going to break down the science behind it, ranging from the basics of what a macro even is, all the way up to a definitive guide to calculating the perfect macro breakdown for fat loss, for building lean muscle, and everything in between, along with some tips at the end to make it work. But before we jump into it, y'all know how much we love you. Y'all know it. And if you love us back, the easiest way to support us is to take 5 seconds right now to go rate us 5 stars on whatever platform you are listening to us on. And if you're on Spotify, hit that follow button so each episode every single Monday pops right up. We're closing in on 20,000 followers on Spotify, but followers don't matter. It doesn't make me happy at night, but it is what it is.
And if you want more after each episode, you can join us on Fitness Stuff Premium for just $5 a month, where you get a bonus episode every single Friday where we answer your questions. We do that and so much more, like monthly $300 Legion supplement giveaways, complete training programs like our 12-week push-pull-leg program we dropped just a few weeks back, and more. The sign up is in our show notes, and we'll see you over there. Before we do that, quick note. But before that, just 1 second, a quick shout out to our sponsor from day one, Legion Supplements. We love them. I think you guys love them. I hope you do, because we're not going to shut up about them, especially not their protein. So if you need to re-up, they have their plant protein. They have their whey protein isolate, which is my personal favorite. They have their casein protein, and their flavors are to die for. I was getting sick of overnight oatmeal that I add my protein powder into for meal prep. So I made some chia seed pudding with protein powder. Their honey cereal protein powder is so good. You just do a little bit of Greek yogurt, some chia seeds, some almond milk, and a scoop of protein powder. Love it. So
is that
easy.
Recipe on your Instagram too?
It is. It's on my Instagram.
Perfect.
Quick little plug, but love it. Love it. You can get 20% off with the code FSPOD at checkout. The link is in our show notes below.
Anywho, we're going to jump into a fun little podcast today. We got our brains might be a little scattered, so bear with us. I know we got some flights. I just got back last night from the Dominican. You're leaving tomorrow morning. I'm leaving tomorrow morning for another trip. Our brains are a little all over the place. I got like 18 loads of laundry, so bear with us. Also, quick shout out to Reagan, who edits this podcast. She's the mastermind behind the thing. She's got engaged. Did you see that? Did we talk
really?
About that yet? Yeah,
I didn't know that.
Freaking
oh
adorable.
My goodness, exciting. So
I was
fun.
losing my mind. She hasn't picked up my call yet, so she can catch me up on the details. But it was freaking adorable. So shout out to Reagan, the person who makes this whole thing work. Okay.
Do you want to hear how many books I read this month before we get into it? I know some people DM me about it, so I know some people care. Can
I guess? May I guess?
Yeah.
4. Because they're massive. They're like 1,000 pages. Because they're like 1,000 pages.
Not 4. No, only one of them was 1,000. The others have been like between 7 and 8. Between 6 and 800.
How many books?
14.
No, you haven't. You've read 14 books that have been like 700 to 1,000 pages?
Mm-hmm. No, some of them were 600.
How fast do you read? How do you get anything done? How are you productive?
Well, during the week. Like, I read like once I'm done for the night.
You're telling me you read 14 books just over the course of weekends? I don't buy it.
Weekends and like at night. So like once I'm done with working, so like at like 7 till like midnight, I'll read.
I don't know how you get anything done. Are any of your books about macros?
No.
No books about macros.
No books about macros, but that's what we're here today for.
Do you remember how big IIFYM was like 10 years ago?
Mm-hmm.
When people first started catching on what it was? It was it was on t-shirts, the IIFYM, like it was on bracelets, t-shirts, everything. It was everywhere. It was everywhere.
It was like a cult.
It was almost like a keto cult or anything like that. But
Yeah.
I think it's still largely today, it's more understood than it was, but it's still, I think, a little bit misunderstood everywhere else. But we're going to dive into exactly what it is, what a macro is, what the whole point of this really is, because it's really built on principles of our metabolism, right? It's not a way to lose weight or to make composition progress. It's kind of the way to do it. Look at, and here's where I like to see it, is like, look at who are the best people in the world at changing their body compositions. Who are the best people at losing fat the most rapid? Who are the best people at building muscle as fast as they possibly can? It's bodybuilders, right? They do this for a living. That's what they professionally do. Find a bodybuilder who doesn't diligently track their macros and their calorie intake. You can't. Yeah. There's not a bodybuilder who's like, oh, I just intermittent fast. I don't pay attention to anything else. I do keto. I don't pay attention to anything else. Every single one of them tracks and measures their macros. And I think that's fascinating to look at, because you want to look at the best people in the world when you're trying to decide where there's truth. And I think people forget about that sometimes, is you don't see a bodybuilder go through one of those examples. At least I don't. I don't know if you have.
No, it's almost standard now, I feel like, to assume that a bodybuilder is tracking their macros.
Yeah. It's sometimes I think people don't like it because it almost simplifies it down into like a math equation. You know, and it's like, oh, our health or our body, it can't be that simple, right? It's not just A plus B equals C or whatever macros makes it sound like to be. But there's a lot of truth to this. And there's also a lot of dark sides to it as well that we're going to highlight. So let's just start with the basics, because I realize we have a lot of coaches who listen to this who it's like, okay, bro, I know what a calorie, I know the basics. Let's start here and build up quickly, because I think this is one of those with the on-ramps that we can go pretty quick as far as what are macros, what are macronutrients, right? Macro is just a contraction of the word macronutrient, which is a type of nutrient the body requires in large amounts. So not micronutrients like sodium or potassium or magnesium, all these things that we've talked about before, these vitamins and minerals that they don't require in large amounts. And the primary macronutrients are protein, carbohydrates, and fats. And I think another key characteristic of what a macronutrient is that people don't realize, unless you're in the space, macronutrients are the only things that contain calories. And we're going to talk about what exactly the difference is. These are the only places you can get calories from. And that's why some people consider alcohol to be like a fourth macronutrient, is because you are getting about 7 calories per gram from alcohol, but you can't consume calories anywhere else. If you're consuming calories, consuming energy, it has to come from one of those 4 sources. And a lot of people getting into it don't fully understand that piece, I think. Would you think that's a good nail on the head there?
Yeah. And I think it's just funny because it's like they're called macronutrients, but if you're studying nutrition, say in school, they're called energy yielding nutrients. Like that's what we mostly refer to them as, because that's a much bigger difference between them and micronutrients, is that they yield energy, not that just they're required in greater amounts.
That kind of sounds cooler too. Energy yielding nutrients. Kind of sounds nerdy, but I like it. Anywho, and the whole, if it fits your macros diet or routine, which would you actually, before we get in, would you even call it a diet, or is it more of just a nutritional strategy?
I think that's how you approach it. I think you should approach it as a nutritional strategy, but I think because of how it's been poorly communicated in the media, people look at it as more of a diet.
I think you actually nailed that, because I was trying to separate that, but I think you're right. It should be more of a nutritional strategy. People start seeing it as a diet. And when you start seeing it as a diet, you almost put it in the same category, in the same bucket as any other quote unquote diet, the keto diet, the fasting diet, whatever it is. It's not in the same bucket as those, right? It's not in the same bucket. So we'll explain exactly why, because if it fits your macros is really a dieting strategy built around the principles of energy balance, the most basic markers of the human metabolism that we're going to talk about. And these principles are that your body weight is dictated solely by how much you eat, not what you eat, right? In this way, a calorie from brown rice is no different than a calorie from a brownie in this way. And we'll dive deeper and expand on that here in a minute. The second principle is if you want to improve your body composition, so not just weight, but body composition, so either lose fat and or build muscle, you need to eat the right amount of calories per day according to your goals, and then pay attention of where those calories are coming from. And like we just talked about, calories can only come from one of 4 places. And we're going to touch on alcohol, but usually people don't set an alcohol goal for every day, right? So
other than limited it, like
other than saying, hey, maybe not. But anywho, so that's where it makes sense. Where, okay, if we're trying to lose or gain body weight, calories are what's going to matter. If we want to say where that body weight is coming from, that's where macronutrients come in, right? So if you hit your macro targets, your protein, your carb, your fat targets every day, you'll see results regardless of the foods that you eat. And there's going to be second and third order consequences to where you're consuming these macronutrients from, like brown rice or a brownie. But bottom of the day is if you're giving your body these requirements, it's going to change in very, very similar or exact ways, right? So the TLDR of that, the too long didn't read, if it fits your macros, is a more refined version of calories in versus calories out. If you want to think about it like that, where you're just paying attention to a little bit more, right? Calories in, calories out, focusing on gaining or losing weight. If it fits your macros is what type of weight you are gaining and losing.
Can I ask a question here that people might be thinking? Because I feel
You may.
So if you're tracking your macros, do you not have to track your calories anymore?
That's a great question, because I actually wrote that up because I've gotten that before. And in our heads, we're like, what do you mean by that? But on the outside in, you hear that and you're like, oh, this makes more sense. So what we're going to cover briefly when we cover what the different macronutrients are is each macronutrient holds pretty much the same amount of energy no matter where you're getting it from, where a gram of protein is always going to hold 4 calories worth of energy. And we're going to talk about the difference. And I think defining a calorie is going to help with this. But a gram of protein, no matter if it's from steak, if it's from soy, if it's from anywhere else, is going to have 4 calories per gram. Same thing with carbohydrates. Fats have 9 calories per gram, and then alcohol has 7. So if you're tracking how many grams of each of these you're getting, you can easily calculate how many calories you're getting on top of that. So inadvertently, you're tracking calories when you are tracking macros. That was actually a great question, because a lot of people get confused of which is better. It's essentially macros are the next step on top of calories. It's not one or the other.
Yeah. Because you have to still be in an energy deficit in order to lose weight. I have seen coaches, I have seen fitness influencers get up in front of a whiteboard and say, you need to stop tracking calories. You need to track your macros.
Have you really?
I'll send you a video. And she's gotten called out multiple times because it went super viral. But it's just like the fact that like that, I can see how it makes it so confusing, because people will actually say that. People who have a following in the space will say, stop tracking your calories, stop worrying about calories, track your macros. And it's like, well, okay, can't really do
that. I mean, unless you're just choosing not to look at the calorie number when you're tracking it, but it's there no matter what.
Yeah.
But it's a confusing question when you're coming in, if you're new to this concept of macros. Now, let's talk about the science that goes behind it. Energy balance is a good place to start, because that's where we have to, I think, make this separation of the difference of what calories are versus what macronutrients are. Because remember, calories aren't something you can touch. It's not a thing that you can hold, where a macronutrient is a physical thing. And we're going to talk about that here in a second. And I think this is a great place to highlight, which, have we talked about Mark Hobbs or the Twinkie diet before?
I think we have. I don't know if we've talked about it on the podcast, though.
Okay. And if we have a lot of episodes, and I realize not a lot of people go in and out. So if we've heard about it, I think it's super interesting. But I actually pulled up more and more details about it for this episode. But it's a pretty cool experiment that a professor ran with his students. Now, it's called, or coined as, the Twinkie diet. The Twinkie diet. Okay, this is done by Dr. Mark Hobbs, a professor of human nutrition at Kansas State University, where for 10 weeks, he ate a diet made up of only Twinkies, Oreos, Doritos, essentially food that you could only find at a gas station. It's also, people have said, the gas station diet, something interchangeable. And while he did this, he monitored his weight and different metrics of his health. Okay, so while he monitored his weight and different metrics of his health, he had one rule. Okay, he had one rule. He had to stay in a calorie deficit for all 10 weeks, which for him was around 1,800 calories, right? He calculated his TDEE, which we're going to talk about later, which was about 2,600. And he found that for him to actively lose weight, he needed to eat about 1,800 calories per day. Now, the goal here is just being to see if he could lose weight while eating nothing but junk food, because so many people, that's just a broken thought, right? You can't eat Twinkies and lose weight, or at least so we thought. Now, after 10 weeks, he lost a total of 27 pounds, right? He lost a total of 27 pounds, which is a lot in 10 weeks. That's a lot of weight in 10 weeks.
Yeah.
But that's not even the cool part. This is the cool part. Okay. Not only did he lose a ton of weight, but all of the inside markers of his health also improved. His LDL, or bad cholesterol, actually decreased by about 20%, while his HDL, or good cholesterol, increased by about 20%. His triglycerides dropped by 39%, which is an insanely good sign for cardiovascular health, right? A really good sign of cardiovascular health. And his blood pressure remained steady and in a healthy range throughout the entire experiment. Okay, so every metric of health that he was tracking, inside and out, improved. And I'm not recommending anybody to do this at all, but it highlights a very important fact. A calorie deficit isn't just a way that you lose weight. It is the way your body loses weight. It is how your body loses weight if you're consistent with it. And I think the inside markers are even a cooler part. This goes to show highlight, because so many people freak out about this. I know Jordan Syatt just did a cool experiment where he spiked his blood sugar every day for 30 days while wearing a CGM and lost 9 pounds, showing that it's possible to spike your blood sugar and lose weight. People always freak out and they're like, oh, well, Mark Hobbs, he ate nothing but junk food. He might have lost weight, but his insides are so unhealthy. It just goes to show that improving your body composition alone can do so much for your health.
Well, so was he overweight, in like an overweight range to begin
so
with?
His starting BMI was 28.6, I believe. And at the end, it was 24.9. So he was in the overweight, not obese, but overweight category, and ended in more of a normal range.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's like, depending on your starting point, losing fat around your viscera, your visceral organs, is single-handedly the best thing you could do to improve all of your health metrics. It is single-handedly one of the best things you could do, is reducing the fat that is around those vital organs. And I don't think really people think about that. And it's not to say that you should eat like that, like Tony said. Shows that it is still possible to improve your health.
At least, in the short term, it really just goes to show, like, because how many people, and especially on social media today, blow up and go viral for making people afraid of certain small things. And it gets people, I think, in losing weight, focused on the things that do not matter. Oh my God, I had some seed oils in my diet today. I did X, Y, and Z. That's way worse for my health than anything. It's like, no. It doesn't matter if you're overweight. If you can get to a healthier weight, if you can lose body fat around your viscera, like you said, your health and markers will likely improve 10 times more than just cutting out of food in your diet and staying in more of an unhealthy lifestyle every single day. And I thought that's a really cool experiment, because he took it to the extreme. At least that's how I like, whenever you have like a rule in life, or if you have your values, for example, like we were talking about last week, I think you really do need to test it at the extremes to see if they still hold up, right? Like a calorie deficit. If you don't test it at the extremes, or if it doesn't work at the extremes, then something's wrong.
Yeah. And I have a good, I want you guys to keep this example in mind, because I'm going to refer back to it, because to show kind of the long-term implications of this that could happen, that I have a study on, because this is short-term. And that's also something to keep in mind. Could this be a sustainable diet for years and years on end? Is this going to be healthy as I get older? That is really important to think about. So don't lose sight of that, but I'm going to refer back to it.
Yeah, because we're going to talk about the difference of just, like, can I eat just Pop-Tarts and whatever? And I can guarantee you, he probably did not feel great during this diet. His digestion probably was not great. Long term, it might not be a good solution, but if he stuck to it for 10 weeks, it was, again, testing out that extreme example. Now, let's make the separation between calories and macronutrients real quick for those who might not understand before we dive deeper into it. Now, people have this debate all the time, and I think it's so silly, because I'm big on, and I know we are both big on, communication. The most fundamental aspect of like almost anything, weight loss, relationships, your entire freaking life. Communication is important. And if you define a calorie, the conversation of, is a calorie always a calorie? The answer is always yes. The answer is period yes. But I don't think people realize what they're talking about when they disagree with that point, right? So a calorie, by definition, and I know this is always a fun one, the influencers I see online giving this advice, or 90% of them using the word calorie, I don't think could define the word calorie if you asked for the simple definition.
Yeah.
Is that too far? I really would estimate up to 90% of people who use that word don't even know what it means.
Yeah, I have something to say after you explain this, because I completely agree.
It's outrageous. But so the definition, right? Look at it in a dictionary. A calorie is a unit of energy Remember that part? Equivalent to the heat energy needed to raise the temperature of 1 gram of water by 1 degree Celsius. And you might be like, what the? I thought we were talking about food. Why does water, I use Fahrenheit, not even Celsius. What does any of this have to do with food, right? The point that's important here is that first part. A calorie is a unit of measurement. It's not a thing, right? You can't touch it. It's not a physical thing. It's a unit of measurement, like a mile or a cup. You can't touch it. Now, think of a calorie is always a calorie like this. Any unit of measurement, a mile, anything, is always going to be that unit of measurement, no matter what else is in between that measurement. Like a mile is always a mile, whether it's in the ocean, around a track, up a mountain. The distance of 1 mile is always the distance of 1 mile. What's in that mile is going to be very different, or how hard it would be to travel that mile is going to be different too. Which the first time I said this example, this joke got me. They were like, well, actually, there's such a thing as a nautical mile when you measure it in an ocean. And it's based on the circumference of the earth, which isn't actually equal to a mile. So a nautical mile, I was like, okay, that made me laugh really hard. I'll give you a point. So technically he's right. I looked it up. A nautical mile is equal to 1 minute of latitude. So, okay, take out the water impact, but an inch and anything else. But a nautical mile is still actually a different measurement than a mile. So a mile is always a mile, but that did make me laugh. I don't know why the word nautical made me laugh, but it's always going to be equal. And I think that's where people are like, well, no, a calorie is not always calorie. So it's like a calorie is always a calorie. What you're consuming that makes up that calorie is going to be different every single time. Now, here's where I want to drive it home real quick for this, right? Because you might be like, okay, it's a unit of energy, or a measurement to measure energy. What does that have to do with anything? And it comes down to our homeboy Newton, right? And the laws of thermodynamics. And the first law of thermodynamics, or the laws of energy, is that energy cannot be created or destroyed, only transferred, right? You can't just create energy out of nothing. You can't destroy it. It only can be transferred. And now that we know that a calorie is talking about energy, this starts to make sense. Okay, so this is starting to be a fundamental principle of our metabolism. Food contains energy. We are burning energy throughout the day. We can't just create it and store on to extra energy out of nothing, right? We can only transfer it. And I think that's where this starts to make sense. What did you want to say before the first part, before we talk about analogies too?
Well, when you're talking about a unit, if anyone's taken any course, you know how important, in any math course, science courses that require calculations, how important units are. Because if you put the wrong units, you have the wrong answer. A unit is consistent. And I think about how when you think about a field that is dedicated to understanding something using calculations, you have to have consistencies within it. If I'm given a question on a biochemistry course that asks me to calculate the grams of strawberries versus the grams of potatoes to get this much heat energy, which is a calorie, there has to be a standardized way to calculate that. You can't, if it wasn't the same, if understanding that calorie was not the same between these two foods, you wouldn't be able to do that. You wouldn't have the calorie number on a nutrition label because no one would be able to calculate it if it's different for every single food. And I think that influencers, what they do when they make this accusation, not even just influencers, I see dietitians do it. There's a lot of people that are in the camp that they're not the same, like a calorie isn't a calorie. And they take this topic and introduce a completely new one when they'll say, well, it's not the same because you have all these nutrients in strawberries versus you don't have any nutrients in potatoes. It's not the same thing. No, now you're talking about the nutrient quality of a food. You're not talking about calories.
They're
it's
using
a completely different
languages.
topic. Yeah. So that pisses me off. I'm like, that's not, you can't, that's a completely different story and topic to tell. I agree with you, but it has nothing to do with a calorie being a calorie.
Yeah. I mean, how many times do you see that in everyday life? I see so many people when they're having arguments, especially when it comes to like politics, they completely are talking past each other because they're not even using the same base definition of the words that they're using. Yeah. You know, they're just talking, they're not even having the same conversation. Or when you see relationships get in arguments, how many times is one person talking up here, the other person's down here, when honestly, a lot of the time they probably agree on the same points, but they're just using it in a different way. And that's where this conversation comes up because nutrient density is important.
Yeah.
But when it comes to like 100 calories of strawberries versus 100 calories of Hershey's chocolate bar, the nutrients and what you're getting out of those 100 calories is going to be very different, but 100 calories is going to be 100 calories. Like 100
Yeah.
pounds of flour is going to weigh the same as 100 pounds of feathers. Anything else in between there is what matters. And this is where you start to understand how you lose and gain body fat. And I think honestly, it helps sometimes to stop using the word calories and start using the word as energy, right? You're constantly taking in energy through food. You're constantly burning energy through activities. And that's where the concept of energy balance or calorie deficit, calorie surplus, that's how your body weight is set, right? If you're taking in just as much energy as you're expending, your body's going to stay the same. If you're taking in less energy as you're expending, by either burning more or taking in less or a combination, right? Again, we just talked about it. Your body, or what's holding a base amount of energy right now, it can't just create extra energy to fill that gap. It has to lose and give off that energy. And that's where weight loss comes from over time. And same thing with weight gain is when you're taking in more energy, you have to store it because you're not spending it, right? Imagine, I know there's 100 analogies, but my favorite is just imagine putting a bucket with a little hole in the bottom underneath a faucet with water coming in and then water leaking out of that bucket, right? If the water is coming in from the faucet at the same rate as it's dripping out of the bucket, the level of water in the tank is going to stay the same. But if the hole gets bigger, and in this analogy, that would be by maybe exercising more or by improving different metrics of your metabolism that we'll talk about later, that hole opens up, you might have water leaving. So that water level is going to shrink and shrink and shrink, or your body fat is going to get lower and lower and lower. That's how this works. And I know there's a lot of conversation, but hopefully now that starts to separate the difference of, okay, macros are the things that we consume. Calories are how we measure it, essentially. And I know a lot of people have the questions, and I know the big ones that dispute, oh, calories in, calories out, it's bad science, it's bad. There's two parts of this, right? One, you have to realize that every single weight loss study conducted in the last 100 years has concluded that meaningful weight loss requires you to burn more calories than you consume, period. There's never been a single study done out of the thousands and thousands that goes against this principle. And people like say, oh, it's my hormones, or it's broken, or it's this or that. And you have to realize there are things, and people don't realize this influences the size of those holes from the faucet or in the bucket. Like, for example, there are certain metabolic disorders that can cause your body to burn less energy than average. Like hypothyroidism is probably the one that has the largest effect on your actual metabolism. And it reduces your BMR, which is only a section of your total metabolism that we'll talk about later. And even this, though, it can reduce in the more extreme cases your BMR by up to only about 5 to 20%, which can it make things a lot harder? Yeah. But it can't be enough to completely prevent someone from losing weight, because that just requires different energy requirements is all that really is. So those things influence calories in, calories out. They don't dispute calories in, calories out. I think it's important to recognize.
Yeah. And people just oversimplify calories in, calories out from the standard that it can sound like, oh, this is just easy. Because this equation is so simple, it is so simple to lose weight. And that's where you have a problem, right? No, this equation and the laws of thermodynamics are never changing. And that is the baseline that's required. The way you're going to get there is going to be different from person to person, how easy it is, what tools you need to apply to your life to get to that weight loss that you're trying to see. That is not easy. But because you have these just, I don't know, these stupid fitness influencers or people coming on the internet just saying it's just calories in, calories out, just eat less, move more. That is where it's like, that's where people start to have a problem with it. And I can see that. So this isn't us oversimplifying weight loss. It is showing how weight loss occurs point blank, period. Like, this is what has to happen.
And that's why we're spending so much time on it, is because people simplify calories in versus calorie out. It is a extremely complex system, extremely complex. It's not that simple. And that's why we're trying to explain why, because so many people that doubt it or challenge it, they think it can't be because I did the simple thing. It was simple and I didn't do it. It's not simple. And that's where I think I think this is a good point to even jump into talking about nutrient density now, so that we've kind of defined what energy balance is before we go into, I think this will be a nice lead into how we set calorie intake and then why and how we set protein, carb, fat goals. Yeah. So let's talk about nutrient density for sure.
Yeah. So nutrient density is the quantity of nutrients within a specified amount of food. So how many different nutrients? Is it high in certain nutrients, than others. Think of whole foods. So fruits, vegetables, whole grains, seafood, beans, legumes, nuts. Those are going to be very nutrient dense foods. They have a variety of different nutrients, and you get a high amount of specific micronutrients if we're going to use that comparison. So nutrient density focuses largely on micronutrient density. So your vitamins, your minerals, and it also would look at fiber. The concept of nutrient density is important across any eating pattern. You should think about it if you're trying to improve your diet from a health standpoint. And I think that sometimes a downside of the if it fits your macros is not paying enough attention in terms of communicating it to nutrient density. Of it doesn't matter what you're eating, as long as you hit your macros, it does not matter at all. Looking at that from the sense of specifically just your body composition and just the number on the scale that you're trying to get to. Bodybuilders in their peak, like right before a competition, towards the end of all of their training leading up to it, there is the nutrient quality of their foods. Everything's the same. There's no variety. You're missing so many micronutrients. That's not good for your health. That's going to get you cut and lean because you're eating very little food and you're hitting your macros to a T. But when we're talking about our health, nutrient density is important.
Yeah, because they're some of the most nutrient deficient people or populations you can study is people who are either stepping on stage for shows or right afterwards. People think I'm joking because you look at them and you're like, that is the picture of health. That's what's on the magazines. These are the most nutrient deficient people you can actually observe, usually in at least like the United States, things like that. It's not a big joke. So they're not the same thing, right? They're not mutually exclusive. It's really important.
Yeah. And so this is where kind of like the quantity over quality nature of the if it fits your macros, kind of when it was in its peak starting out, that really didn't emphasize the importance of nutrient dense foods in your diet at all. So just like striving to eat clean 24/7, only having whole foods is not going to be good for your mental or physical health. Neither is going without eating a single fruit or vegetable every single day and having no color and no variety in your foods. It kind of gets to this extreme end. What I want to talk about with nutrient density from a long-term perspective, when you can prioritize nutrient density along with your macros, though those two should go hand in hand.
Yeah.
That's definitely what I could recommend. But you can see a significant risk to your health if you are not prioritizing nutrient density. And also in the long term, when it comes to adhering to a diet for weight loss, looking at nutrient dense foods can also help you feel more satiated if you are trying to focus on fiber. I love fiber. It's great. One of the best things about it, if you're on a weight loss journey, is it's going to help increase your fullness. It's going to help you feel more full, satisfied after a meal versus if you're just eating, if you have some chicken, broccoli, again, you also get protein versus eating a bag of potato chips. Again, completely different. But if you have the same calories of them, one is going to make you fuller than the others. Again, that's an extreme example, but that can kind of just put into perspective of going to these extremes with thinking it's just for my macros. That's all that matters. Fat, carbs, protein, not looking at different vitamins, different minerals that are going to get you the nutrients you need for optimal health. So it's important to look at eating a diet high on micronutrient dense foods can reduce your risk for heart disease, diabetes, obesity, and all-cause mortality in the long term. So that's something to also think about, and also your gut health. So if you're eating a variety of micronutrient-rich foods, that's going to feed your good gut bacteria. So you're putting your gut health at a significant disadvantage if you are not eating micronutrient-dense foods. The only way for your good gut bacteria to grow and thrive is by eating fiber, because our gut bacteria digests fiber. We do not digest it. And that's how it grows, thrives. There's this interesting study. It's a Harvard study, and it's a large cohort study. So they looked at 120,000 healthy men and women spanning 20 years. And this is a longitudinal study looking at the long term. This isn't a randomized controlled trial, but this helps us understand disease risk. And this is why these studies can be important. And the study set out to find what causes weight gain or loss in the long term. And they looked at changes in diet, lifestyle, or everything in between. So they looked at stress levels, other lifestyle factors that Tony and I have talked about a lot before. And they found that after looking at 3 different 4-year time intervals, so take that as you can, individuals who ate a diet of the majority containing processed foods like chips, sugar sweetened beverages, fried foods, gained weight over the long term. And this wasn't a significant amount. It'd be on average like 4 pounds. While individuals who ate unprocessed foods like whole grains, fruits, nuts, vegetables, and they were the majority of their diet, did not gain weight or they lost weight. So it's not this huge, like, if you're not eating in this big calorie surplus, of course, you're not going to see this huge jump regardless of what you're eating, like Tony has said before. But it still can have an influence when you're looking at your diet in the long term of, well, now hunger and satiety is at play. Eating more foods that are rich in protein and fiber, micronutrients, that can also help you maintain your weight or even lose weight. So it also has factors playing a role there. And then they also looked at a lot of their blood biomarkers like cholesterol, triglycerides, hemoglobin A1C, and those were all in the healthier range across the board for those who ate a diet in mainly whole foods. So it is something that's important when you're taking the long-term approach.
Yeah. Well,
I don't know if you have anything to add there.
Well, because I think the best way to think about this is, and I know it's a concept I've talked about just a handful of times here, but the concept of having first order consequences and second order consequences and third order consequences. Because I think a lot of people see this diet and they took it to the extreme, like every person, in every concept in fitness is taken to both ends of the extreme. And people see it as like, oh, I can eat Pop-Tarts and protein shakes and my body physically will change in nearly identical ways. I love Pop-Tarts and protein shakes. I'm just going to do that rather than cook a whole meal. And they're thinking in first order consequences, where if the only consequence is, oh, my body composition will improve, then good job, you did what you wanted to do. But they don't think of the second order consequences. What happens because of that? Oh, I'm going to feel like shit. I'm going to be probably miserable, sad, depressed, all these bad things that come with that second and third order consequences. I mean, you can look at this principle in anything of life, right? Nothing's going to have just one immediate consequence. Or if you want to picture it, I don't even know a good analogy in my head to use, but it's like if you fall down into a big old pit with your friends and you have a wooden ladder that could get you out, but you see it and you guys are cold. So you start breaking apart the ladder to burn the fire. You're like, well, cool. I accomplished the job of keeping us warm, but you don't realize that you also just diminished your chances of getting out of that pit because you broke apart the ladder. That's the second order consequence that you didn't think about when focusing only on building the fire or fixing that first problem. And so many people are so focused on body composition where they're like, I only want to focus on improving this, that they don't realize what could spin from this afterwards. Because I'll tell you that too. Like, I didn't take my gut health as seriously until I forget what episode it was, but we had done a few that you were doing on gut health. We had talked about fiber, I think it was the gut brain connection episode, but just simply improving my fiber and caring more stuff about that. It's like, you don't really realize how much better you feel while doing this. And I don't think people realize as a second or third order consequence, how much easier it is to stick to a workout routine or to a diet if you feel good while doing it versus even if you are eating Pop-Tarts, whatever, and you're in a calorie deficit, like Mark Hobbs eating Twinkies, whatever, I guarantee you, he felt like such crap. There's no way he could maintain that calorie deficit for much longer than that. Yeah. And probably wouldn't have gotten to that 10-week mark if it wasn't a self-experiment for his students in the first place. So I think that's what it comes down to is people think it's like they're mutually exclusive. It's like, no, you need to blend these.
Yeah. And this is the conversation of nutrient density that people confuse with a calorie isn't just a calorie. People start to talk about nutrient density and say 100 calories of Oreos is not the same for you as 100 calories of broccoli. Well, from a nutrition standpoint, no, of course not. But from a calorie standpoint, it is absolutely the same. But those are two completely different conversations. And I hate that people just talk about them as if they're the same thing.
Yeah. It's just, it's two different languages they're speaking.
Yeah.
And it's like, of course, you're not going to arrive at the same conclusion when you're not even talking about the same things. Now, let's talk about, that was micro focus. Let's talk about the macros themselves and how to set them and why this is more important and how this can help influence your body composition, because that's the next important part, is because we've talked about this. We don't want to just lose weight most of the time. We want to lose fat while preserving our muscle mass, not just to feel good, but to maintain any weight loss over time or just improve overall body composition. You need lean mass to do so. Now, we're going to talk about things in like order of importance. So whatever change you're going through, if it's gaining or losing any sort of body composition, calories need to be lined up first. Period. The end. If you don't have that, it doesn't matter if you're getting 40% of your macros or calories from protein and 20, 30 from carb. None of those numbers matter if your calories aren't set first. So we're going to go over that after this. The next most important concept is protein. And this is where we're going to talk about these two alone will get you 90 to 95% of where you want to go. And we talked about this with one of our first podcasts ever. It was like first 10 with Zach Cohen, the dietitian that came on. Mm-hmm. Like if you pay attention to these two things, and honestly, out of all of my clients that I've had, 90+% of them that do track food macros, we only track protein and calories. And there's a reason for that, right? So one, I mean, protein is going to help you build and preserve muscle while also increasing your metabolic rate from a physiological point of view, while also making every other aspect of dieting easier. So that lifestyle point of view, right? When it comes down to the physiology, which we've talked about before, so we're not going to beat it to death again, because I don't want to just repeat everything we've already talked about, but it helps you preserve muscle mass while you're dieting, which is probably the most important aspect of why you want a high protein goal while you're dieting. We'll talk about how to set that goal next. And we've brought this paper up before. It was really cool, just out of the University of Birmingham, right? Researchers in the UK, they compared groups in a lower protein group and a higher protein group during a calorie deficit. And of course, they were in the same calorie deficit. Both groups lost the same amount of weight, but the group that had 35% of their total calories coming from protein opposed to 10% lost twice, or sorry, the 10% group lost twice as much muscle as the 35% group, twice as much muscle throughout that period. Right. It also increases the thermic effect of food, another big piece of your metabolism, by just being digested and taking more energy to digest. And then the second order consequences, which are huge, the satiety and hunger, right? You talked about that with fiber. From a macronutrient standpoint, nothing is going to fill you up, lessen your mood disturbances, your stress, your fatigue, your cravings during a calorie deficit than protein will. And especially, and this is where people are like, oh, just slam a protein shake, which can be very helpful. But when you're consuming protein that's matched with a lot of different other macros and micros, like in a meal, you're going to even feel those effects more and more. For example, like if you're having grilled chicken with a sweet potato or something, name anything with a good amount of fiber in it, that's going to keep you a lot fuller longer than just slamming a 25-gram whey protein shake, for example. Neither are bad, but combining these things is huge, right? And research is very clear on that. So protein is going to be the next big mover because it's going to help do what we want from a physiological standpoint, our body composition. We want to preserve and or build muscle. Now, when it comes to carbs and fats, these are going to rank right underneath, essentially equally important, underneath calories and protein, right? That final step of the puzzle.
Would you say they're equally important?
Well, I mean,
that's an opinion. I think
that's an opinion, but I'm saying as far as like, if you want to level things of importance, carbs and fats can be more or less interchangeable rather than setting a hard protein goal, a hard calorie goal. The direct carb and or fat goal, those are equally important, even though in your diet, I'd probably say fats are more important, but for different reasons that we can go into. But anywho, why they actually matter, and fats are usually what you set up first. Fats we want in our diet so we can, we can build cell membranes, absorb fat soluble vitamins, obtain essential fatty acids through food, and keep our sex hormone production within typical ranges. You need a certain amount of fat to do so, right? So after you set your calorie goal, your protein goal, you want to at least make sure you're getting enough fat. And we're going to talk about these levels here next. And then the rest usually can come from carbohydrates, right? Which is really your body's main energy source, which is going to help you perform and recover better. But those two can be more or less interchangeable. And I think here's what is confusing about that, because people will stress out about setting these macro goals when you're paying attention to exactly how many grams you need from each. And I think that'll be a cool conversation to tie up after we talk about setting this. So what we got to do is set these up. And here's how you'd set them in a step-by-step manner, which we're going to put all of the tools that we mentioned in our show notes. But if you want to set your macros, step number 1, find and calculate your TDEE, or your total daily energy expenditure. Did we ever have a full episode on TDEE? I think we did.
I think we did. Yeah.
Did we not? And essentially think of your TDEE as interchangeably. It's not the same thing, but it's what people refer to when they're talking about your metabolism.
It's a part of your total daily energy expenditure is like a part of metabolism. So looking at, fat carbohydrate, protein, metabolism. Like metabolism, it is every single chemical process going on in your body at one single time.
Yes.
So this is one of those, I would say TDE is a component of metabolism, but it is incorrectly referred to as metabolism when people are talking. And I don't even think people actually realize that.
They don't. Like when people say, oh, this is how you increase your metabolism. That's not really a thing. That's just a not complete sentence, really.
Yeah.
If you think about it, but this is what they're referring to is you can increase your TDEE. That's what they're referring to. And your TDEE is made up of 4 different parts. And if you don't know what we're talking about, I really urge you to listen to that episode because it was a great one, right? So how many calories you burn in a day? Because most people think it just comes from, oh, how much you exercise, which is so far from the truth, right? You burn calories in 4 places. One of those places is called your EAT, or exercise activity thermogenesis, but that only makes up about 5 to 10% of the daily calories you burn. So even if you're going hard at the gym for an hour and a half in the morning, that's still probably going to be the smallest part of how many calories you burn in a day. Where you also have TEF, or your thermic effect of food, right? It takes calories and energy to digest the food you eat. And that's what we were talking about for protein. It requires more energy just simply to be digested. And that makes up around 10% of your total daily energy expenditure. Then there's that non-exercise movement, which Marianne and I love to death, right? What are you doing outside of the gym? How many steps are you getting? Are you standing versus sitting? Are you fidgeting like I do for the hour on this podcast? Your non-exercise movement. And then the biggest chunk, your BMR, which makes up roughly 50 to 70% of your total daily energy expenditure. And that's the part where like those different metabolic disorders like hypothyroidism, it impacts your BMR, not your TDEE as a whole, right? I think an important distinction. But you have to find out how many calories you're burning in a day first, because you're going to set how many calories you need next. Now, there's 2 ways that we do this. One is by using a TDEE calculator, which we're going to make some for our website, we promise, in the near future. We're going to link below a simple one. It's just tdecalculator.net, I think. But I don't know how you feel about calculators. I don't love them for a certain reason. And that's because they are taking at max like 4 or 5 different variables of a person to calculate a number that should require hundreds of different variables, right? Like your calorie burn during the day, right? So this calculator will give you a rough window or estimate of where you should be. This is not a definition of this is how many calories you're burning in a day. And I think this is where a lot of people get frustrated, is they'll calculate it on MyFitnessPal or a calculator and say, well, no, I'm burning 3,000 calories in a day, but they might have entered in a few wrong numbers when they're really burning like 2,200 calories a day. They're like, well, I'm eating in a calorie deficit and I'm not losing weight. It's like, you think you are, but you're not. I think that's a big level, but that's a good way to at least get a rough estimate. If you want to find the most accurate way to really guarantee where your TDEE is, and this is what I do with most clients coming in for the first 2 weeks, track as diligently as you can the food that you are taking in, right? All calories that you're coming in from your food, your drinks, anything else, track it as diligently as you can, because you can never be exact. And then take daily weigh-ins for those 2 weeks so you can monitor your trending weight and then line those up. If you find that you're eating 2,800 calories on average a day, right? 26 one day, 3,000 the next day, 24, but you average 2,800 calories and your weight is trending in the same 2-pound up and down range, that means that your TDEE is probably right around 2,800 calories. And if you want to set a deficit up, you set it based on that number. That's going to be way more accurate than a calculator is going to be. But either way, that's what you got to set up first. Which, do you have a better way than that? Or do you favor one or the other for yourself?
That's always how I do it. I always have people track, and some people I'll even have us do 4 weeks, just depending on how kind of all over the place they are with their weight or their eating. But it allows you to see like, oh, my weight hasn't changed, and this is the average that I'm eating in calories every single day. I'm going to use that point and subtract from that. And I think that's the best way. You can use the calculators to inform you a little bit as well. Some people don't really like, they want to start right away, which I also don't advise, but
yeah. The more time you put up front setting out and defining where you are, right? If you define the point you're starting from and the point you want to be, it's easy to connect those 2 dots. But if you don't take the time to define where you're starting from, it's kind of shooting in the dark. And 4 weeks would probably be the best way to do it. But if you want to get a head start too and do 2, 3, or even 4 weeks too, you'll still continue to monitor and adjust based off of those numbers because that's going to change over time, which is important. But once you find out what your TDEE is, step number 2 is by setting your calorie goal. And that's going to be different whether you're trying to build muscle or lose body fat or go through a recomp. So we're going to go through those 3 briefly, which we've done before. But if you're setting up your calorie goal for fat loss or a cut, which most people refer to, you typically see a moderate calorie deficit between 20 and 25%. A lot of people will start lower at like 10 to 15%. I never recommend going above 30%. But essentially what that means is if we're saying 20 to 25% calorie deficit, that means that you're only going to be eating about 75 to 80% of whatever you calculated your TDEE to be. So if your TDEE is 2,500, or that's how many calories you burn in a day, a 25% calorie deficit would be eating 2,000 calories per day. That's how that would set up. And we went over the whole calorie deficit episode, which I'm like, if you do want to set that up, go listen to that because there's different reasons where you'd start at 10% versus 20% versus 30. It's a variety, but that's just an example, right? In setting them. If you want to set it up for a lean building phase, which I never recommend a dirty bulk, but if you want to build some muscle and stay lean, you got to realize bulking and building muscle is a lot slower than cutting. Right? You can't build muscle at the same rate your body can lose fat. And most, and especially newer research is showing that anything more than 5 to 15% of a calorie surplus is just going to lead to extra fat gain without any extra muscle gain. 5 to 15%, that's a tiny little margin that you're going of. And that's also because I had a lot of people that messaged me on this when I was talking about this on my social media. This is if you are like an average person lifting in there. If you're a natural, and if you are set, that's a good place to be. If you are a newbie or you're on PEDs, you could probably go a little bit higher because your body can build muscle at a quicker rate than everybody else. So I do think that is necessary to say. And even if you're on PEDs or brand new, anything more than 20, 25% is going to be overkill. For example, right, if your TDEE or how many calories you burn is 2,500, a 5 to 15% calorie surplus would be between 2625 and 2875 calories per day. Easy peasy, but you could even set that up on the calculator. Now, if you're trying to do recomp, which we do a whole episode on recomp.
We have a whole episode on it, yeah.
Oh, I love recomp. It's one of those things we used to just think in recomp, for those who might not be familiar, it's a lot of people's goals. It's where you're losing body fat and building muscle at the same time. And we used to think this was only possible in newbies or people using steroids. But a lot more recent research in the last 10 years, I know a cool paper done that was reviewing, I think we did in that episode, over 12 different individual studies observing recomp in trained individuals, along with countless case studies. I have several examples of clients who have gone through kick-ass recomps where their weight will either stay the same or gain a few pounds, but they look absolutely incredible because they're losing fat, building muscle and strength at the same time. Absolutely incredible. But you want to stay calorie-wise around your maintenance for that to happen. Either a slight surplus, slight deficit, but you don't want to go too far above or below that. So that is step number 1 and step number 2. What do you think step number 3 is going to be?
Protein.
Oh, dang. You got it. Setting your protein, right? Your next, third step, and honestly, maybe your last step for most people, right? Now, most research shows that between 0.6 and 0.8 grams per pound of body weight is sufficient for maximizing muscle gain and health, but usually higher intakes hold more benefits, right? And I know this is more my personal opinion, and I have a protein calculator that we're going to link down below until we have our own that'll give you a good range. But I think basing it off of your lean body mass, I don't know your opinion on this, basing your protein intake off of your lean body mass compared to just your body weight, so by how much muscle you have pretty much instead of just weight, is a lot more accurate and usable than just your weight. Is that where you kind of sit too?
Yeah. If you're able to determine your lean body mass, it's typically recommendation.
Yeah. And it can be more challenging, but like the only example is look at like the body of NFL quarterback Cam Newton, who weighs 245 pounds and is roughly 8% body fat, who also does 2-a-day workouts, lifting weights, training, he's active. That person is going to have a completely different protein requirement for what's needed to maintain compared to someone who also weighs 245 pounds, but is sedentary, doesn't lift weights, and carries less than half or even a quarter of the muscle mass as Cam Newton. Those two bodies don't require the same amount of protein because of how much of a role protein plays in muscle and recovery. So we'll put that calculator down below, but usually it's between 0.8 and 1.2 grams per pound of lean body mass, which we give you a way to calculate that as well. And it's just a rough estimate. And that's a big point on this. Now, the next and fourth final step is really just setting your carb and fat goals if you want. And I actually want to get your take on this one. And here's how you would do this is essentially you calculate your total calories, your total calorie intake. So let's say 2,000 if you're in a deficit. And then you can use those calories per gram to calculate out how much you're at. So if you have 2,000 calories and you already set your protein goal, which let's say is 175 grams of protein, multiply that by 4 calories because it's 4 calories per gram to get 700 calories. That means the rest of those calories are coming from carbs and fats. So in this scenario, 1,300 calories, right? Now, I know a lot of people, and I want to get your take on this. They also set a fat goal based on body weight or lean body mass, i.e. X amount of grams of fat per pound of body weight. And I'm not the biggest fan of that. Are you?
Oh my God. No, I've never even heard of that. Is that
Really?
like a bodybuilding thing?
It is. I think I've noticed it more in the bodybuilding world, but even stretching outside of that a little bit more. But that's how I've seen it done more than rather just saying, oh, like 30% protein, 20% fat, 40. I've seen it a little bit more than that. I'm guessing just based on your reaction, that's not the case.
I just feel it's so unnecessary, especially for fat. There's a performance aspect of carbohydrates that you can get really analytical on in terms of timing, how much around training, especially for endurance athletes. If you're looking at that world, if you're looking at extremes, like that makes sense. But even in the fat realm, if you're talking about like for performance or strength purposes or fat loss, it's like fat is just, you have baseline needs for your body to function and fulfill the processes that fat is required for. And again, it's like that 20 to 25% range. Solid. It's not that.
Yeah.
And if you go above it and you tailor back your carbs, like that's fine. If the lower carbs doesn't hinder your performance or adherence to your diet, I just feel like that's craziness.
I wanted to get your take on it before I said mine. First and second order consequences. I mean, first order, your body composition isn't going to care how much is coming from fat or carbs as long as you're not getting next to zero of either of them, right? Unless you're going extremely low on either of them. If they're somewhere in the middle, you could have a higher fat diet, lower carb, or a lower fat, higher carb diet. And as long as they're not crushing each of them, if your calories and protein are in line, your body composition will change in the exact same ways, right? And research has been abundantly clear on this. And I know we've gone through a lot of this on different ones, right? The study over at Arizona State University finding no difference in weight or fat loss in people consuming either 5% or 40% of their calories from carbohydrates over 10 weeks, as long as calories and protein were matched. The Harvard School of Health comparing groups at 35%, 45%, and 65% of their calories from carbohydrates, absolutely no difference over 2 years. Stanford, Duke even took it a step further and said of those carbs coming from sugar. And again, no difference in weight loss or fat loss in people consuming between 4 and 43% of their calories from sugar, right? So the takeaway from this is if you like fattier foods, you should eat more fattier foods. You shouldn't limit yourself because of your macro goals or it's only 25%. Same thing if you like carbs. I know I've had this conversation before. I love carbs. I like more carby foods, where Karina, my girlfriend, likes more fattier, more savory foods. So obviously she's going to want more of those, because are you going to stick to a diet more that you're actually enjoying rather than saying like, well, crap, I like all these carby foods, but my carb goal is only set to X and I can't go over it. Why? Your body's going to change in the exact same way if that's how you do it. And again, fats matter a lot to at least keep it a baseline, right? You need them to absorb those fat soluble vitamins, right? To keep sex hormone production up. For your general health, you need a certain amount of fats. You don't need the keto amount of fats where it's like 90%, but at least if you're getting between 20 and 35% of your total energy intake, you'll probably be good covering that up. But look at your own enjoyment. I just don't like the whole set your carb and fat goals. If you perform better eating more carbs, eat more carbs. If you enjoy more fats because it helps you stick to your diet, eat more fats. That's really where this comes down to. So sorry that we're not going to give you an exact, you need to eat 143 grams of carbohydrates per day. Don't shy away from that, because it just doesn't matter. And research supports that.
Yeah, I agree. And I didn't want to say this at the beginning because I didn't want it to bias how I was speaking towards this. But anyone who comes up to me and asks me my take on if it fits your macros, I'm like, Well, it depends on the purpose of why you're doing this. Like I personally, no, you don't have to pay that much attention to your fat and carbs and overanalyze it. You can have a goal, but first thing I'll say is, what do you eat more of? What do you crave more of? That can kind of help differentiate between the fat cravings versus the carbohydrate cravings. Like, what do you typically enjoy more of? Because we're talking about that long-term approach of, is this a way I can eat and want to eat year after year? And that's going to change. Sometimes it's going to change. And that's flexible dieting to me, is like, yeah, I could still have these baseline goals, but sometimes my fats are going to be at 35% and my carbs are going to be a little bit lower. And then sometimes it might be the other way around.
Yeah. And it's just the most important aspect of it. Cause I see so many times new coaches coming in. Cause we have a lot of coaches that listen to this too, that will blindly subscribe to a macro calculator based goal of 30% from protein, 50% from carbs, 20, whatever it might be, without even looking at where the person's diet was first. And like I had said in the beginning, like when I have a new client, the first 2 weeks, we're just tracking without the intent to change anything. We don't say aim for these goals. Just say, track your food. Let me see what you're eating. If you're eating a pizza every Friday night, track it. I want to see what that looks like. Because if you notice that you generally have a higher fat intake, then your goal should probably cater to that rather than just blindly setting a fat goal that could be very close or super far. You have no idea of where you're going. So the research just doesn't support setting a hard limit on those. And that's where I know we're going to talk about how you're going to make these stick. But that's the fourth and final step, where maybe it helps you have structure of aiming for those goals. And that can be helpful. But I've also seen it take a very obsessive take. And especially just friends out here, we were talking about this before the show started, in the like more bodybuilding physique based world too, they'll take it so hard where they'll have a completely random goal of, like, let's say 143 carbs per day, which, on the side note, if you're setting macro goals, set them at like whole solid numbers, like 140 or 145, because it's easier. You got to keep in mind your body's energy needs are a moving target day to day. What your body requires today is not the exact same thing tomorrow, but it's impossible to tell. As long as you're averaging a certain amount over time, that's how you can calculate these bodily changes. So if it's 143 rather than 145, that's just, honestly, it's for show. I think it makes things more confusing. But I would tell you, I'd have people who were so obsessive over it, they'd have a 143 carb goal. And one night they would eat 147 carbs for that day. And they would undereat by that 4 extra carbs they eat the day before the next day. Just thinking like, I need to nail that specific number. You have to realize these numbers are soft. These aren't exact goals. And that's why I help, like in the app that I know we use for coaching, it has like a variance setting where it's like, okay, here are your goals with a 10% variance. As long as you're landing within 10% of this number, your body's not really going to notice a difference if you have 147 versus 143 carbs. And this can change if you are Olympic level competition stepping on a stage. Yes. But for 99.9% of the world, does not matter to stress out about these exact numbers.
I think, and that's where social media can do people wrong in so many ways, is you're using these people who like eat, sleep, breathe, gym, and tracking their macros. It's all they do. And you listen to that advice and you think that it has to be that extreme to be successful. This can go for any diet that is an extreme diet. You have to eat little to no carbs and you have to eat a bunch of fat in order to lose weight. Anything. It's like throwing yourself in a deep end and not knowing how to swim. You're trying to execute something that you have no experience doing. It's the worst starting point to think that you have to start out extreme, or that you even have to get to an extreme level. You should never be reaching for that level, but you're getting advice from people who are doing something that you have no experience doing and have no business doing. And I hate that for others. I hate it.
Yeah. But it's because a lot of people, they don't understand why. And like, they understand that moving target piece. Why? Like if you have a good night's sleep versus a bad night's sleep, your body's going to utilize carbs differently. So the quote unquote optimal target for your carbohydrate goal for that day is going to be different than what it was yesterday. So stressing out if you hit it within 1 or 2 grams of carbohydrates logically makes zero sense. Not only does it not play out in the real world, it logically makes zero sense because there's zero way to control. And that's what I think stresses a lot of people out, is it's like these set numbers. And that's why I think it's easier, instead of setting 143 grams, set 140 or 145, because 143 sounds weird and more exact, but it doesn't matter. If you're getting close and consistent over time to these goals, same with calories, same with anything else, that's what matters. So don't stress out if you're missing your macros by this or that, if you miss your carbs or you miss your fats. If you're hitting roughly the same protein and calories every day consistently, or most days, your body's going to change, period.
Yeah.
So there's no need to stress about it. Now, this is obviously, it sounds like a great place because I think it's super helpful for a lot of people for a lot of reasons. Let's go through a few tips on how to make this work, practical tips on what to avoid, what to do as you start tracking, or if you are tracking. Where would you start off?
Yeah, I would say first being get rid of that I can eat anything I want so long as it fits my macros mentality. And that is what if it fits your macros kind of says, point blank. Don't assume that that is just a free pass to eat junk food all the time and not really have many whole foods. No, you should still be prioritizing eating whole foods. Don't ignore the nutrient density concept. But again, it's not this extreme. I would say if you could give kind of a range of what your diet could look like, trying to aim for 70 to 80% of your foods from whole food sources is a good place to start. Then you can make room for treats and fun foods that you enjoy, and you allow yourself more of that leniency. And it's not this strict hard number because, again, you can't really quantify what 80% is going to look like right off the bat. It's going to change a little bit for everyone, but I think that's a good starting point.
I think that one's huge to getting to stick to it, because I think that covers and blends that whole nutrient density conversation without going black and white. It's either this way or that way. Because a lot of the people who are the quote unquote like clean eating, what crusaders, what'd you call them in that one episode?
Oh my God. I don't remember what I called
it. It was something like that. It was a hilarious name, but it was the people who are like, no, you can't have anything quote unquote negative.
Oh, grocery store gremlins, not
yes,
they were grocery store gremlins. But,
or honestly, the people who have extremely disordered eating habits themselves. It shuts them up, because I promise you, because they'll say everything's unhealthy. Here's the challenge that I have for that. If you're eating 70, 80% of your foods from whole food sources, you're getting a variety of micronutrients, and you have room for treats, which, keep in mind, is going to help you stay in that diet or deficit or pattern longer, which is better than anything else. Staying on something for months is better than weeks of cutting everything out. Show me any single measurable health metric that is going to decline by including some treats in your diet, as long as you're hitting the goals that matter. And here's the thing, you can't. Like Professor Mark Hobbs, people, oh, it's terrible. LDL went down. HDL went up. That's a good thing. Triglycerides went down. Blood pressure stayed healthy. You know what I'm saying? Where are we seeing this negative impact? And that's not to use on an extreme example, but if you feel bad for fitting in treats, because online people are going to make you feel like shit for eating anything. A Diet Coke.
I eat chocolate every single night, and I have a Diet Coke almost every single day.
Exactly.
Live and breathing, and I'm one person, but it's just crazy what, like, that's my vice. Like, that is my guilt. I'm not guilty about it anymore, but it gives me pleasure when, from a dietary standpoint, like, I love those things. Make it work. You can make it work without thinking that you have to be this perfect person that eats the perfect diet. Like, that doesn't exist.
And if you're working with a client or you're just getting into tracking macros, this is the single best aspect about flexible dieting, is it gets you away from that line of thinking that you have to be perfect or black and white for a certain diet, like keto, right? I cannot have carbs and make progress. This will show you that you can include any food that you want in your diet in moderation and improve your health, improve your physique in any way that you want. It shows you what matters. And it kind of helps you, I guess, relieve some stress that a lot of people have with eating perfect or eating healthy or eating clean all the time.
Yeah, I think that goes into that is the next tip of, like, avoiding this all or nothing approach. That kind of blends right into it. When you have that with any diet, you're not going to be successful, because it isn't all or nothing. It is, you are going to have ups and downs. You shouldn't be swaying from one extreme to the other. It's going to change with the seasons. Like, how you're eating is going to be changing. But if you have this rough idea of your macro goals, if you're giving yourself a range of, and not just relying on, it has to be 143 grams of carbs, but maybe we're going to have this range that I have a goal for, and I'm going to strive for that. And it's okay if I get off of that. Sometimes I am. Sometimes that's going to happen. It's not all in perfect or just completely out. and then starting again in 2 weeks. Just any diet, avoid that.
Yeah. It's probably honestly one of the most helpful tools that you can use. I've talked about this before in the show. If you want to understand nutrition, because so many people are frustrated because they get to that point where they try so many diets and they're like, I feel like the reason I'm failing is because I just don't get it. I don't understand any of these things that I'm doing. More than any book, more than any podcast, more than anything else, nothing I think is going to teach you more about the food you eat than tracking your macros if you're in a place to do that and paying attention to how it changes your body and how it makes you feel. Right? Like nothing's going to teach you more about different foods, because the goal, and we're going to talk about this later, the goal is not to track your macros forever. And you should not need to whatsoever. But doing that for a short period of time, 3 months, 6 months, a year, helps you understand food so much better. So as you're going through the rest of life, you more or less understand what your body needs, what to give it, what different foods are impacting it. It teaches you so freaking much.
Yeah.
More than any book, I think, could right off the bat. Like going through it is going to teach you so much.
Yeah. Looking at it as a short-term learning tool. And I think that goes for like anything overall. Tracking calories in general, that's not something that's meant to be do forever. Sometimes you might go through periods where you haven't tracked calories in 5 years and now you're at a point where you need to again. Like it's not something that you can you have to like cut out forever, but it is informative. That's like the mindset piece is so important, because you can have the tendency to get obsessed with it and overthink it. And any sort of tracking can consume people's lives, and it can make you feel shitty about yourself if you don't hit that goal. Looking at it as something that doesn't define your success, but helps your success, helps you in the long term, informs you about what you're eating and maybe why you're eating it and what your body leans towards and what it doesn't. And that it's going to be a helpful tool. It doesn't hold power over your success. And I think that mindset piece is going to be important. And then going into, after that, having an exit strategy, because it shouldn't be forever. So always be thinking about, even in the beginning when you're planning, okay, what am I going to do when I'm done with this? How am I going to use this moving forward so I don't have to meticulously track everything that I'm putting into my mouth every single day? Because that sucks. No one wants, I wish I just started this out with, no one wants to do this. I mean, some bodybuilders, it's like their full-time job, get it, like thrive off of it, fine. It is not convenient. It is a lot of work. No one wants to think about the food they're putting into their mouth other than like, does this taste good? And is this making me feel good? Like it's not fun.
It's not a fun thing to do. No.
And so that's okay. Like it's okay for it to not be fun, but finding ways where you're like, okay, this isn't going to be forever. That makes it easier. It's not something that you have to do forever, but have a plan for when you're coming out of that. What have you found about your eating patterns that you really like? Maybe you're noticing, wow, like I'm having more carbs on my plate. Kind of this is what it looks like when I have this ratio of fat to carbs to protein. I'm going to try to build my plate like this more, rather than weighing everything out because I don't have to, because I'm at a point where I don't need to do that anymore. Like little things like that in terms of your eating behaviors.
Seriously. Like having an exit strategy, so underrated. 90% of people who go into it alone, even people with some coaches, don't even think about, okay, the goal is to lose X amount of pounds. What next? What's the exit strategy, right? Because you can't lose weight forever. You can't track macros forever, or that would just be a miserable existence for most people, like you said. What's the exit strategy? And then what do you need to be doing to get you there? Even just in any weight loss goal, that's important, right? What next? Are you going to reverse out of it? Are you going to go into a lean build? Are you going to go into maintenance? Okay, how are you going to get there, right? Have an exit strategy, or at least spend time thinking about it. Big one. And I think last one too, this is the understanding, because it's frustrating when you're learning, especially if you're doing it without a coach who's, and I'll put an asterisk next to this, not just a coach, but a coach who's good at communicating the understanding aspect of it. You got to understand, like, your goals are going to constantly change as you gain weight, as you lose weight, as you do these things, your needs are going to change. So this is just giving you data to monitor and say, okay, this is what I'm giving. This is what's happening. How can I adjust these later? Right? There's no such thing as a perfect macro setup. There's no such thing as that magical percentage distribution. There's no such thing, because that's going to change. And I guarantee you what might be magical now in 6 months is not going to be. Right. So you have to understand that's where tracking can kind of help you understand those aspects as well. Right. Those are the biggest practical tips to go in there. And I know we've talked about this in different episodes on how to track your food, on how to track all these things. That's why we didn't go into it. So if you want to learn more about that, we can try and find those episodes and put them in the show notes. But I know in the show notes, we're going to put the TDEE calculator, the protein calculator to help set those goals as well. And then any other episode links on top of that to help you get where you need to go. I think
That's
that
good.
ties a bow. I think that's it, right?
Yeah, I think so. Hopefully you guys take some, like, at least I think there's one thing you could take and actually implement if you're thinking about tracking your macros that can even get you started. If it's intimidating, just start with protein, or just start with protein and calories, kind of see, don't feel like you have to jump into it all at once, but now you have the information to kind of make that decision.
Yeah, the understanding. And if you're a coach too, like realize like your clients, if they understand why they're doing what they're doing, it's going to get them so much further than just blindly following the macros that you found or found on a calculator. Teach them the why, teach them the understanding. It's so important. But that's what we got. All right, Mariana, we're going to sign off and hop on a plane and a jet.
Yep.
So peace out. See y'all later. But we'll talk to y'all on Premium this Friday for the next ADMA. AMA.